podcast. On this particular episode, I'm going to be speaking to Olly Wood. Olly has been on the podcast before, so he is a repeat offender. And we're going to be uncovering the importance of this looking after your body and really understanding how you might do that, which I think it's going to explode a few myths and a few commonly held thought processes about how you need to look after yourself to be able to perform, I guess at your peak, but also for longevity. I just got off a conversation with a bunch of our Builders Business Black Belt members, and one of them was telling us about a trade that he was in this situation partly because he didn't build his business in such a way that it gave him any sort of time freedom, so he had to be there. But he had also got to the point where his body just wouldn't do it anymore, and it looked like he had to walk away from his business. So imagine being in that situation where your body just won't do it anymore, and you've got to keep doing it because you don't have any other options. So the podcast is here to help you build your business, to give you time and financial freedom. But also, we want to talk about prevention and how we can look after ourselves so we can perform at a better level and for longer. And it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm saying, you need to stay on the tools forever, because that's not giving you the time freedom. But wouldn't it be great to have the choice? So that's what we're going to unpack in this episode. Here is our guest, Mr. Olly Wood, all the way from New Zealand. I was just in New Zealand with Olly a week ago. We had a 2-day session. I got COVID. And you didn't feel too good yourself afterwards, I'm led to believe.
I was a bit rough. Yeah, it seems like half of Auckland had COVID that day, so we all walked away from a health workshop a little bit worse off, but hopefully long-term better off.
It's one of those little ironic things where, how did you go on the weekend? Yeah, it was really good. I went to this health summit and came back feeling really ill. and just before we pressed the go button, we were talking about riding motorbikes, because you've got a motorbike helmet in your background there. And it reminded me of the day that I came back from a road safety course, how to ride on the road, a whole course. We'd done the theory, we'd done the practice, and I rode my bike off on the way back with my certificate in my pocket that I just passed. So a little bit like that. Bizarre. So you heard what we're talking about, and one of the things that really sort of the penny dropped. It was one of those blinding flashes of the obvious. On the second day of our weekend, last weekend, we were all in the gym, probably where we got the COVID, who knows. But you were talking about movement and strength, and one of the things that really got my attention was at the end of a movement, or the extremity of a movement, say you're doing some sort of bench press or whatever it might be to strengthen your chest. There is the way that most people do it. They strengthen the middle part of that movement, but where often injuries happen is at the extreme parts of movement, and we don't really ever do anything to build that up or protect ourselves from those injuries. Can you please help explain how that works and what mistakes you see people making to be able to prepare themselves for just normal work and normal life activity without having to put up with the injury that we often do?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think builders and farmers are two fascinating categories to look from here. And to give you context, I grew up on a farm. I was the one that my first job was hay baling, right? So if you want to, why would you go to the gym and wear yourself out? There's a whole bunch of hay bales to go lift, or some wood to chop, right? And in that environment, it feels, why would I waste my energy on this thing when I've got other work that's physical? And I think, as you've just said, when we're in certain tasks where we're on the tools or it requires some sort of physical element, we have those same repetitive patterns that we use every single day. So we get really strong through our forearms and through our shoulders and potentially through our lower back, whatever else. But at the same time, as we reinforce those strengths, there's those weaknesses that come through from any repeated pattern, right? Whether you're an athlete, whether you're a builder, whether you're a farmer, whether you're an office worker, there's going to be repeated patterns that we go through. So being able to look at weight training less of lifting something heavy up and down and looking at it more as an opportunity to find where those weaknesses are and find the ability to strengthen the weakest link in the chain, what you're ultimately doing is building a stronger, more stable platform. And I think that's where a lot of injuries come through, because we really start to get tight and sort of immobile. And when we look at weight training, I think there's still this common belief that if we weight train too much, we're going to get sort of muscle bound. And that's something I certainly hear a lot, where we kind of look at weight training simply as getting bigger overall. Whereas the way I'm trying to approach weight training in this space is certainly from a longevity space, is it's more of a scalpel, not a machete, right? We're going in there to contract the muscles that are not firing. If we can get those glutes working, we're not putting as much pressure on the lower back, which is a super common injury if we're building. If we keep getting strains in our shoulder, there's probably a stability of our shoulder blade that we can start to address, things like our lats or serratus or lower traps. There's all of these areas where training becomes an opportunity to contract the muscles that have been lazy for a while, and we start to build that overall stability back. So when you look at that concept of where the injuries come in at the extremes, it's more, we all get very strong in that mid-range, right? We walk a certain way, we sit up and down a certain way, we do the same motions the same way. What we're able to do with weight training, if we control it and we think about what the muscle's doing rather than what the dumbbell or barbell or machine is doing, we start to access and contract those muscles that are otherwise fairly dormant. And that just gives us an ability to have a more whole, complete, functioning body. All right. You take that back to the tools, you take that back to the hay bales, and things start to move differently. You don't have that lower back screaming at you. You don't have that tweak or that pain in the shoulder. I think it's just a way of using it as a fairly helpful diagnostic tool, not just from a muscle building or fat loss standpoint, but ultimately strength and shoulder integrity or joint integrity that we're trying to address.
And so part of the challenge with this, I find personally, is just having that body awareness of what muscles you're contracting and just sort of focusing the effort into a particular place. And the part of that I struggled with, and I'm starting to get it now, it was kind of a mindset thing where I could lift a heavier weight than this, but I couldn't lift that heavier weight properly. And so whilst I might be doing a press with 10 kilos, to do it properly, I'd probably be only able to manage 4 kilos or something like that with the bar in each hand. How important is it? And it's kind of a loaded question, because even though you helped me with this personally, you're in New Zealand and I'm in Tasmania. How it's done is through the app that you've given me, and there's very detailed videos on how to do it. I just think it's so important to have someone to guide you, not only how to do it properly, but what to do in what sequence. And we're going to talk about sequencing in a minute.
Oh, we're going to get right into it.
Okay. that was something that I learned. There are these numbers that I didn't know what they were. I thought they were, I don't know, postcodes or something. So we'll talk about that. But how important is it to be guided? Because I just see now that I've been guided by you, so many other guys in the gym, and they're making big loud noises and going for it. And I just feel that that's not right. That they're not really achieving anything other than bulk. There's no value benefit to it.
Yeah. So one of the biggest things that most people would be able to appreciate, certainly if they use their body physically in their work, is there's a couple of aches and pains and strains that start to come through as we age, right? And if we're in our 20s, we're made of rubber and magic. We can usually do things a bit dumb and it still works. And then we have a couple of sort of niggles and pops here and there in our 30s. And then by the time we get to our 40s, we're probably listening a bit different, or at least we've been sat down with humility to maybe address things a bit differently. So I think from a training standpoint, most of us have to touch the hot stove to realize it's hot. And in this case, most people have to lift dumbbells in a way that it hurts their shoulder or their hip or something for them to do it a different way. And that starts to unwind that process of, okay, what does weight training really look like? Because if I just lift that extra 10 kilos to make my ego better, but I'm now hurting my shoulder. Well, long term, that's not going to be too great. Now, the big thing that I think is really interesting in a gym environment is usually the first set we do, if we're warming up properly with a lighter weight, is usually the best set that most people ever do, right? Because it's the one where they actually intentionally slow down. They mindfully look at contracting some sort of muscle, again, hopefully. And then they start to build it up and start to put more and more of the weight on the bar. And in doing so, they kind of stuff it up in the process. Because what happens if you're doing something like a chest press, we would be sort of wide, we're driving our elbows across, we're contracting our chest. And as soon as we start lifting a little bit heavier, we start to sort of bunch up a little bit. We bring those dumbbells in a little bit closer. We start to allow our shoulders and our triceps and other muscles to do a lot of the work. And that's where it becomes less of an isolated select muscle exercise and becomes more of an overall systemic ego exercise, right? Because we're just trying to contract every muscle we can to get the thing up, which is allowing our body to go, okay, you take over, use the muscles that are already strong, which in my perspective is kind of useless because we're just strengthening the muscles that are already strong rather than highlighting the ones that we want to contract. So it's more a question of what's in control, right? Your ego or your muscle. And I think when you can slow that down to contract first, I think you'll find that, doing a bicep curl with 8 kilos is actually a very reasonable amount of weight because it's just your bicep, not your hips and your back and everything swinging through it. Versus something like a deadlift, you can put a couple hundred kilos on the bar because it's your whole body. And I think just being able to separate that, what's a more isolated exercise, what's a compound movement, it allows me to put 200 kilos on the deadlift or whatever it might be, because I've taken the time to realize, okay, my forearms can do 200 kilos, my legs can do 200 kilos, but my back can't. So how do I get my back strong enough to next time I pick up the barbell, it's not my forearms and my quads doing all the work until my back goes ping. And I think that process of just diagnosing what part of the body needs a bit more stability, a bit more strength, a little bit more activation, becomes a way of selecting your training really directly to you. So in saying, I think, most people are simply focusing on the wrong thing, which is the dumbbell or the weight in their hand rather than what their body's doing. And the simple way to start here without having a full awareness of the anatomy chart can simply be row that thing to the back and then hold it. What do you feel? Go down to the bottom of the squat and what do you feel? And just spending more time there because, certainly something we did in this exercise, Mick, was we'd hold you in certain positions, right? We'd spend a bit more time in that position because as soon as we're uncomfortable, our body's naturally going to bounce out of that pretty quickly, right? We bounce out of the bottom of a squat, we bounce out of the back of a row because that's where that muscle's most under demand. And if our body doesn't want to change, it's not going to spend a lot of time there. So just spending more time really slowing things down and being more mindful of it, that in itself, without even knowing more about the anatomy, would allow you to be a lot smarter in how you move.
Yeah. I don't remember exactly what you said, but I remember it sounded smart when you said it. So I'll give you my version of it and then you can clean it up and clear us up. But it made a lot of sense to me that your body is always trying to just get the job done. It's not trying to figure out how to balance my muscles and all of that sort of stuff. And so the builder that's throwing a 20 kilo bag of concrete up on his shoulder or into the wheelbarrow or what have you, their body is doing that in the body's way, but it's not necessarily a helpful way to do it. And your body's always trying to protect yourself.
When you lift something like the concrete bag, it's all okay until it's not, right? You lift it, and then eventually it goes ping. And then the interesting part is now what plays out now, right? Because as soon as we've pinged the lower back, and we had a couple of people in this group that went through the straight leg deadlift or some sort of bending motion, right? Where you saw different ways for them to protect that muscle, right? And if you've got the bloke that's lifting the cement bag a little bit differently now and they're swinging it funny or there's kind of a rotation or that's your body trying to find other muscles to protect what's happened, right? And I think the best analogy, or the one I may have used, is if you go stand out on ice, what's the first thing your body does? It tightens up, right? Because it senses instability. It senses something's not stable. So if you've got tightness in the lower back, and this is something I struggled with for a really, really long period of time because I was rowing for 5 years, right? Literally the definition of a very repetitive motion. And it was all on one side. So I rowed on one side. There was always a slight bend to my back. And after 2 or 3 years of doing that, there was one side of my back, the erector down the side of my spine, that did all of the work and the other side did nothing. You tweak that muscle a couple of times and you start to see your body shift. Your pelvis moves a bit differently. The way you lift things is different. And until you take the time to address what's actually not functioning and firing, you're going to keep straining that same muscle. You can stretch that muscle as much as you like. What you're doing fundamentally is going against your body's own natural protective mechanism, which is you've tightened up a muscle because it's trying to stabilize what's already unstable until you strengthen, in my case, the other side of my back. In most cases, certainly in builders, we've seen it be glutes or core or lats, some of those prime muscles that stabilize the pelvis and the shoulder. We're not going to get any more mobile. Mobile is simply strength plus flexibility. If all you have is flexibility, as soon as your body gets some sort of injury or some sort of imbalance, it all coils up like a spring. So that level of stability and strength, hence why weight training is less of a bodybuilding exercise and more of a longevity exercise at this point, because what we're doing is finding the muscles that aren't firing. We start to build that stability back.
Just wind back a little bit to part of your back working and the other part not, because that was something that really captured my imagination too. It was another blinding flash of the obvious, is that, like, if we've got tight hamstrings, our go-to is hamstring stretches. But what you're saying is the opposing muscle needs to be fired up rather than stretching that. And there's nothing wrong with stretching, but it's not the cure for this. It's not the fix for this. Can you sort of unpack that a bit?
Yeah. So if I was going to kick a soccer ball, right, and I've got a certain amount of strength in my quad, imagine if I had 10 times the amount of strength in my quad than I did in my hamstring. If I go to kick that soccer ball, I'd snap my knee off my leg because I've got so much more strength in my quad than I do my hamstring, right? And we see this imbalance all the time because our hamstrings are tight, just trying to hang on for dear life, when it's the one that's ultimately not getting is trying to keep everything stable. So the first thing is just fundamentally understanding that there's always an opposite muscle to stabilize. If I want to relax my tricep, I'm going to fully contract my bicep. The only thing a muscle knows how to do is contract. If it's always contracted and it can't let go, it's likely because the other muscle's not doing its job. So in that example of the hamstring, I think is the perfect one. There's plenty of people that every morning they wake up with tight hamstrings, they stretch out their hamstring, it tightens through the day, and they do it again tomorrow. What we're doing there is it's simply a remedy to make things feel good in the moment. It feels we've trained our brain to say, oh, if we stretch this, it feels good. And in scenarios where we're dynamically warming up for something more elastic, like running, which is more of, it's 50% muscle action, 50% elastic. So we do want some sort of elastic give there. But in something like weight training, we want it to be as much 100% towards muscle action as we can. We're not sitting there, ideally, bouncing through the motion. So when we look at the tightness of the hamstring, the analogy I always use here is the Golden Gates Bridge, right? If we've got something that's locking 2 points together and we got all of these ropes holding the bridge together, if one of those ropes that's holding the bridge together snaps or breaks, our first reaction of looking at that bridge, and hopefully you can visualize this analogy, we basically go to these other ropes and we go, there's more tension on those. We might as well stretch them. Which, now that we use that analogy of a bridge, clearly that's dumb, right? What we need to do is get the rope that's not working back online so that we can start to spread the load a bit more. So in the example of something like a hamstring, if they're always tight, they're always trying to stabilize what's unstable, we need to look at what's maybe not working. So common example in hamstrings might be glutes, it might be hip flexors. It's less so quads because those tend to be a common strength, but it's really looking at what is the weakness in that chain. So breaking it down and diagnosing what it is where I think that external assessment of someone who kind of understands anatomy probably comes in. But I think simply that first thought of, I have tightness in one muscle and I stretch. Oh, hang on, maybe I could look at this differently. What else is unstable? What do I know is weaker? And as soon as I take you through a squat, I'm like, cool, glutes we need to work on, or hip flexors are unstable here. What can we stabilize to build the motion back? I think fundamentally just shifting your view of what you're looking for, right? As soon as we change that and we're looking for yellow cars, we'll see yellow cars everywhere. I think the first part is that we're stuck in this space of, it's tight, we must stretch. If we just ask that question in the middle somewhere, I think we'll learn a lot more about our body.
Yep. Question in two parts that you mentioned it before, the builder is already, throwing 20 kilo bags of concrete around and lifting timber and doing this, that, and the other. Why would I go to the gym?
Yeah.
I think that you've kind of answered that. It's because you need to be able to strengthen and stabilize or activate muscles that aren't activating to stabilize, but also strengthen the muscles that you may use at the extremity of movement to prevent injury.
Mhm.
Why would I go to the gym? I think you've answered that question. But then there's the whole time thing, and I'm working that many hours, and I don't feel like going to the gym and all of that sort of. It'd take too long. My personal experience is this: that you've given me workouts to do, and I'm to do a minimum of 3 a week, and they're like, one would be leg, and one is a pulling one, and one is a pushing one, and I'm finding lately that I'm actually adding another exercise. It might be ab crunches or something else to the workout that you've given me, because I feel like I've walked into the gym and I'm walking out of the gym and everyone's looking at me saying, "You just got here, mate. What are you doing?" Like it's over before you know it, which for me makes it really, really sustainable. And now I'm looking forward to it. Whereas years ago, when I used to go to the gym and it would be a minimum of an hour, or I'd do 2 classes, then a workout or a PT session or something like that, I'd be in there for 2 hours, and it was just onerous. And obviously it wasn't sustainable, which is how I ended up, in your group. But how important is it from a mindset point of view? And again, it's a 2-part question, to keep it short, so it doesn't feel so onerous. But also, I suspect it's short because we're working in a particular area, and then that's it. We'll work on another area another day. How important is
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, so I think the first part is, what is the objective? Is the goal to wear ourselves out and waste 2 hours of our day, or is it to make sure that we feel that we've achieved enough of a stimulus to the muscle that we get the result, right?
Mm.
It's the second one, because what we're trying to do is, how can we get more stimulus to a muscle? Now, if we're not thinking about that and we're just lifting dumbbells up and down until we're tired enough to go home, well, that's how most people approach training, right? And I did that for a really long time, where the leg workouts would be 2 hours long. It was just enough until my legs were wobbly enough that when I went down the stairs, I had to hold the guardrail, and then I knew it was a good leg workout, right? And that was my only threshold of what a good leg workout involved. Now, that becomes entirely useless to the builder or the farmer or someone who's physically active in the day,
Yep.
because now what I've done is just systemically fried my nervous system. So I'm going to be pretty worn out for the rest of the week. Now, what we're trying to do with weight training then is, how can I acutely create stimulus in tissue of a particular body part or set of body parts that allow us to build up a level of strength and stimulus that make us better off tomorrow, right? So it's more about asking yourself, is this workout digging a bigger hole than I can recover from, right? In that case, it's more of a recovery issue, or I'm flat out just training everything in a way that hopefully something will improve. So I think the first part is just kind of lasering in. What's the target? Once you've got that, I think it sort of comes back to what your question was before, or your statement in regards to training the muscle through its full range. Now, that's something that doesn't happen usually in one exercise. It's usually a case of a selection of exercises that allow us to know that we're confident that we've created enough stimulus in a muscle that the workout is complete, right?
Mm.
So if you visualize a bell curve, most of us only ever train in the mid-range. It's the bench press, it's the leg press, it's the dumbbell row, right? Where all we're doing is really training that mid-range of where we know we're strong. It's not until I get you into a leg extension and really hold that position at the top and get a good squeeze, or we do a chest fly and we really get a nice stretch. So we're looking at the extremes where we fully shorten and we fully lengthen the muscle. So for a complete back workout, you'll notice in your examples, Mick, we'll do something like a dumbbell row cable position where we might hold that thing for 2 seconds at the back, really cramp up the lat in more of a shortened position, make sure it's damn well the lat doing the work, not your shoulder or your bicep, right? Then we'll look at something more mid-range like your deadlift or a barbell row, where it's more mid-range, you're stronger, you can move a bit more weight. And then we'll move you to more something like a cable pull down or a pull up, where we're really getting a lovely stretch through that lat through more of a vertical placement. Now, there's different angles placed there as well. But what we've now done through 3 exercises is you can be confident, provided you worked hard enough, that there is a level of, I've contracted this muscle through the entire range. And now I can go home, right? Because I'm not just playing the game of, I'll just accumulate enough stress until I feel tight enough that I feel accomplished, and now I'll go home. Here's a selection of exercises to make sure I've trained that muscle through a complete range. I've focused on accessing the extremes, so I'm not just flexible, I'm now strong in that position, i.e. mobile, and now I know that I'm making the effort I want. So when I come back tomorrow, my shoulders feel healthier, I have a good amount of range to work with, and my hips feel good, whatever it might be, right? So it's not about wearing you out from the workout, it's about contracting and creating the stimulus in the muscle that we've been effective enough with the workout. So hopefully that answers both parts of that, but I think the design of the workout, when you understand how and why we're selecting the structure and sequence of the workout overall, it's no longer just a random selection of workouts that might take an hour.
Yeah. And I think we can't leave until we unpack the secret formula of the numbers. It's, it's like some secret code. But in the exercises, it will have a sequence of numbers. And the numbers, I now know, aren't postcodes or some sort of secret code. They are how the account to get to lift, for instance, and then to hold and then release. And what we were talking about and what I learned was the big number, the 3 or the 4 instead of the 1 or the 0, is the number that you count to stretch the muscle. So what I think I may have done in the past and see a lot of other people doing is there is a cadence of just get it up there and then let it go and get it up there and let it go. Whereas, it might be a matter of jerking to get it up there if you're doing the thing properly, but then the real key is how long it takes you to lengthen the muscle through its full lot of movement. Explain the reasoning behind that, because it's like super important. And now that I know that, it almost makes not doing it properly a waste of time.
Yeah. So there's so many aspects to this, but I think we mentioned it briefly before, which is when we slow down the movement, we feel what's happening. And I think for the first 6 months of training, like that's enough. You're getting stimulus from the muscle, but what you're doing is you're just giving yourself time and space to actually feel what's happening. The second part of that is every time that you're getting to the end of the range, your body in some form, some connective tissue or ideally muscle, has to decelerate that weight enough to go the other way, right? So if you speed into a motion, there's all of this tendon and connective tissue that has to be the buffer of decelerating that weight before it can go the other way, right? And again, that's all good until it's not. Something goes ping and that decelerating doesn't go too well, right? So I think from an initial standpoint, just understanding that the more you speed up a motion, the more connective tissue is under strain. Said another way, rather than it being 100% muscle action, it's now 50% muscle action and 50% connective tissue or something else other than muscle that we're trying to train, right? So simply slowing it down to the point that you know that muscle is doing the work means that you're not putting excess stress, strain, or injury on other connective tissue, which is where a lot of these knee and shoulder blowouts occur, right? Once we've got that right, now we can start to really look at the opportunity to improve stimulus to the muscle without simply lifting more weight, because every time we lift more weight, we obviously increase the risk of injury through more weight on joints. Now, of course, if we control weight, one thing I will say is the amount of weight never injured you. It was as soon as you lifted enough weight that your form had to change, that something went ping, right? So the deadlift is good at 50 kilos. The deadlift is good at 100 kilos. And then you get to 150, your back rounds a little bit and something goes ping, right? So it's not the weight in that scenario that's the issue. I think still a level of progressive overload and looking at strengthening the body is a good idea. But if you're strengthening it through simply bouncing and finding ways for more connective tissue to do the work, then that's not progress. That's Russian roulette until something goes bop. Yeah. Where are we going here? So from that ability to look at stabilizing muscle, there's 3 types of contraction that we look at. 1, you're isometric, you're holding it in one position. 2, you're looking at lengthening that muscle. And then 3, you're looking at shortening that muscle, right? Now, in that order, isometric, eccentric, and concentric, or simply holding a position, lengthening a muscle, and then shortening a muscle, is simply the only 3 ways that you can contract a muscle. And in that order, they get weaker, right? So I know that if I think about lifting a weight up, say it's 8 kilos that I can manage. If I looked at lengthening, maybe I can do a 10, and then an isometric, I might be able to do a 12, right? there's a difference in that simply through the types of contraction I'm doing. I know that I'm stronger if I'm lowering a weight through the amount I can lift versus what I can lift up. Okay. Now, where a tempo becomes super helpful is simply we spend more time where you are stronger, right? So if I do a motion really quickly, I'm really exhausting the shortened range of that muscle because all I'm doing is spending more time over its total ratio in the fully shortened range versus if I'm slowing the whole thing down and spending 80% of my time doing that exercise in the lengthened, I'm spending a lot more time where I can get more muscle stimulus damage without joint damage. Right. So I think just managing that overall time under tension is something that, again, will bring a lot of awareness to how people move. And if you're in the first 6 months to a year of training, simply making sure that your 10 reps last at least 40 seconds of tension, which could be 3 seconds down, 1 second up. It could be 2 seconds down, 2 seconds up. I think fundamentally you'll improve. But it's slowing the contraction down and slowing down how you do the motion is not the benefit. It's its total tension to the muscle and its ability to make sure the weight is on the muscle, not on the joint. Now, from there, we could give you a full 12-month training progression without changing the exercise by simply manipulating the tempo, because there's different levels of stimulus through slowing something down, doing it really quickly, being more of an explosive exercise, or holding an isometric at certain positions, right? And I think that's where you start to really look at all of the opportunities to train. There should be zero reason for you to ever plateau with weight training because there's already so many variables to manipulate. If you're simply doing more weight and more volume, you run out of progress pretty quickly. So I think it's just the ability to look at something like tempo, which is both the speed of which you're doing the motion and the tension accumulated through a set without rest, are two massive principles of training that simply allow you to get more out of what you're doing without smashing the joints in the process.
Yeah. I was on a podcast last night about podcasting, and one of the questions was asked because it came out somehow that I had a bunch of coaches, financial coach, health coach, podcast coach, a business coach that specialises in coaching business coaches, that sort of thing. And the person said, why do you have so many coaches? And my answer was that, to me, it's so difficult and takes so long, and you get such a poor result trying to learn from experience and making mistakes and trial and error and all of that sort of stuff. It just makes sense to me to go to somebody who has the knowledge that can get you the results far, far more quickly, but also without the downside. Like business coaches prevented me from spending shitloads of money in places where I thought would have been a good idea, but I wouldn't have found out that it wasn't a good idea until I'd spent the money and then found out it was a poor idea. In this case, to me, everything that we've talked about today screams you're not going to do this very well at all by yourself. You need to have somebody who absolutely knows what's going on to guide you to do or to create a program that is tailored for you. And another question I wanted to ask, but we're not going to ask it today, so I think I'm just going to ask you to come back another day to talk about that, because there's this whole nutrition side of things that is so incredibly important to the overall health and strength, and the nutrition can make a massive difference on how your brain functions and the decisions you make and all of that sort of stuff. So obviously it's good for your business, but in your mind, how important is that to have somebody that can create something that is very specific to you? I know it's been amazing for me because you have created the physical side of things specifically for me, but also the dietary, the supplements, all of that sort of stuff is specifically for me from a bunch of testing that you've done, like massively detailed blood tests that my doctor had never, ever done. Like they just never, ever thought of it. How important is that to have someone in your corner and to do that level of detail to get the results?
Yeah, like you said before, I think I can. There's two ways of dialing your number. I can put a random selection of numbers into a phone until I finally get your number and it goes through, or I can look at the damn phone book and find your number, right? And I think that was the best way of explained to me of like coaching in a space where you feel unknown. I think the fitness space, certainly for a lot of men, is one of those things where I've seen far too many people go into like, I'll buy the new equipment or I buy the new shiny object, but until you use the thing or know how to use it, it's still entirely useless, right? So I do think it's one of those things very much like it's fascinating looking at fitness coaching from a performance lens alongside business coaching from a performance lens, right? Like you can see like this has a very clear investment into how I change the systemology of my team, right? And then I look at, well, hang on, if I'm operating at 50%, I can't focus, I'm not clear-headed, and I'm triggered every time I go to work because I haven't eaten this morning. Well, that has a pretty big impact on how you lead your team as well. And I think the people that I really appreciate, like you in our world, is you see the ripple effect of how these things impact everything else. It's not simply the become the meathead that enjoys the workout for the sake of the mirror. It's when I do this thing for me and I challenge my body and my brain, I show up as a better person. And if I'm going to the gym confused and frustrated of is any of this actually effective and am I wasting my time, then of course that's just that reverse of all the good things you're trying to do for yourself. So I think it's one of those things where, are you choosing to randomly put numbers in the phone book, or are you just reading the phone book and finding the number?
Yeah. I kind of feel, and I don't know whether this is an arrogant thing to say, but I mean, I've only been learning from you for a short amount of time, but I have done a lot of gym in the past, but there was a big gap between when I did it in the past and when I'm doing it now. So I feel like I'm starting again. But learning the detail about everything that we've spoken about today and the nutrition and all of that sort of stuff, I just find that even from my sort of low level of understanding of the detail of this, that there are still many personal trainers there in gyms and classes that go on in gyms, and the recommendations of what they should be eating and what have you is almost counterproductive. That they kind of just learn it from a book, as they say, in Faulty Towers. I learn it from a book. And they just repeat that same mantra over and over. And it's the same for everybody. And I just see these people doing things where they're not going to be able to get the result that they wanted. It's almost counterintuitive that they're not going to lose the fat. They're not going to build the muscle. They're not going to build the strength. They're not going to create the energy doing it the way that they're doing it. Is that an arrogant thing for me to say?
No, I think you're looking at it, and you always look at things through the frameworks of a business lens, right? And you'll understand that industries are made through what the customer wants, even if it's not the most effective business model or simply the best for the end user, right? It's like saying, what do you need for transport? Well, I just need a faster horse. I don't need a carriage. Well, clearly at the end of the day, that became something that was a smarter move eventually. So what I'm trying to say here is through what we're doing with you is we're looking at it through three lenses all the time, right? It's not just how do we train you harder? It's, okay, there's enough stimulus happening from the gym. What's happening from the psychological and nervous system lens? And then what's happening nutritionally and from that over a recovery or fueling lens? And all of those are going to intercross or have an impact with each other and how they work. So I think the big part here is if you're working with a personal trainer, I think the biggest concern first is, are you going to them to simply work out harder? And is that at the false presumption that you're in a position where all I need to do is be more disciplined? And I think that's something that a lot of men run into heart attacks, they run into injuries, they run into all of these horrible issues when they're like, I'm putting on a gut, I simply need to stress out my body more, right? And there are a plethora of PTs that will simply give you the hardest new WOD of the day to make sure you leave hobbling and sweating. And I think for most men, that's I've done a good job, I'll go back to work now. Whereas if you're not looking at that deeper level of health of, is my body healthy? Am I good for the next 10 years? Am I strengthening, or am I doing damage and stressing out the system more? And I think until you answer that question, you're not really looking at this particularly smart. And I think it's just a case of stepping back and, am I looking at this through complete health, or am I just trying to make myself feel better by, I feel a bit lazy this week, I'm going to slog this body even if it's not the best long-term outcome, right? It's like the person going to business and simply selling harder when everything's falling out the back end where the operations isn't working particularly well, all right? I think it's the same thing. It's just taking the time to manage what your result is, because if it's just doing hard workouts, great. But if it's actually improving your health and shifting this energy issue, the tweaks and injuries that keep coming up, the bloating, the lack of sleep at night, whatever, there's all of these things to address that comes back to more of a complete version of health. So that's the first part. The second one that I'll add in there that might trigger a couple people, that's the point, is most business owners are in a spot where they hire a PT because they're so frustrated that they won't go to the gym for themselves. So what they do is they hire someone so that there's a reliance that they'll show up to the gym. And I think this is the bigger core issue. And Mick, we've talked about this a ton, is so many business owners are in a spot where there's such a reactive nature that we're looking after our family and our customers that we simply don't look after ourselves. And that's why we're in that situation in the first place. Now, if what we're doing is hiring a PT so that we simply have a reliance to go to the gym, we haven't built the skill of consistency of actually training. We've simply built a reliance, sorry. So being able to set up a system, and certainly in our scenario where I'm not at the gym with you, I'm giving you the strategy, I'm giving you the focus, and making sure that when you're there, you're not wasting your time. But there's that massive element that we've overlooked, which is, if I block something in my calendar, am I ignoring it or am I doing it for me? Because most people only do it for other people, and that's why that reliance needs to be built.
Mm. So next steps for people, we're going to put links in the description so they can reach out and see whether what you do is going to be the right fit for them. If they do that, what are the steps? What's the process? What can they expect?
Oh, well, you put me on the spot. So there's plenty of things we could send out. But look, I think the best place to start would probably be our 5-day reset. If you haven't gone through it, I think it's the best way to look at all of these aspects of health that we're looking at. It's not just about slogging the body in the gym. It's also not about just eating chicken and lettuce leaves for lunch, right? It's going to be a place of how do we improve this overall systemic health to make sure that your energy's up, your sleep's good, and you're ready to rock for the following day. So if that hasn't been the place you start, I think it really allows us to look at those small tweaks you can make in your day to design it a little bit differently to actually fit you back in. If your energy's up, your recovery's a little bit better, and we can go deeper from there. But I think that's an absolute foundational part that, as a free resource to go through, as just a very simple series first step, I would go the 5-day reset.
Cool. So we'll make sure the link to that is in the description. Having a look at the clock in the wall, we're kind of out of time for today. As I said, I think there's so much more to cover, particularly I think there's probably at least another 2 discussions that we need to have. One is the nutrition and supplemental side of it. The other is the rest. Not the rest of it, the rest, the sleeping at night rest, the quality of that. There's so much that people, I guess, don't know or don't understand about the quality of rest, and it's just so important. And I'm challenged by that at the moment. It's a lot better than it used to be, but there's so much that you can do to improve that, and it has massive positive benefits, particularly for the business owner, particularly for the builder. So we need to have a talk about that. So I'll have my people call your people, and we'll organise it. And thank you very much for participating today. It's been great.
So no worries, Mick. Look, the biggest thing I want to say there on that.
Back to you.
Yeah, the only thing I want to say at the end there, man, was business owners are so fun to work with because they are driven to make such an impact, but they just let themselves top off that list. And I think when we can start to make those changes where they actually start to see the empowerment of, like, I can have a great business and feel good, that's pretty amazing, right? And the whole place of putting the systems in place, getting our time back, it's literally like the dog chasing the car. What happens if you bloody well catch it, right? And I think for most business owners, as soon as they have that time freedom, they're like, shit, I left my health behind. So having this discussion, whether you're there already or you're on the way to finding that time back in what you've built with your business, I think is one of those core aspects to actually enjoying it once you get there. So that's why I love it. I think it's a really nice space to just manage that state, because when you get so good at putting out fires, life feels weird without fires. And I think where that's really that intersection where the things getting in the way and you self-sabotaging yourself in business are usually the same thing as in health. And that's where that beautiful cross section comes in of these kinds of discussions. So thanks for bringing it on.
Absolute pleasure. It's so fascinating talking about this stuff. I love it. So thanks for being on the show. So folks, that is it for this episode of the Tool Shed, but be on notice that there will be more. There's more to cover in this. And it's, as Olly said, it's the things. The crazy thing about someone who instead of working for somebody else decides to run their own business, take on the challenge, the risk, the sacrifice to run your own business, initially does it for their own personal benefit, to have more time, more financial freedom, to be able to choose their direction, who they work with and who they won't work with. And it very rarely happens. You end up working for nothing. You work big, long hours. You feel crook and you still need to come in, and you work with people that you don't particularly, want to work for. And that's not the point. It should give you energy. It should give you freedom. It should give you health and vitality. And that's the whole idea of this podcast, is to find people like Olly and others that have ideas and processes and tools and resources that can help you enjoy all the benefits that you should be enjoying for taking the risk and making the sacrifice of running your own business. The thing is, you need to take action. We're here providing you with the information and the pathway with links and what have you, that you can make connections with the people that we get on the podcast, but it's up to you to do it. So I really encourage you to reach out, have a look at the 5-day body reset. I guarantee that if you follow the process, that you will notice a difference in 5 days. It can be amazing. So please go ahead and do that. We want you here for a long time. We've got a lot more episodes that we need to record, and we want you around to listen to them. So make sure that you do something about it. That is it for this episode of the Toolshed podcast. We will be back before you know it with another episode. I'm Mick Hawes from Builders Business Black Belt. That is it. I am out. Bye for now.